So next we're going to talk about AD Bridge. As Charles just touched on there, within looking at the universal policy views, one of the things that is possible as part of the solution set is the ability to extend policy into areas not previously done. And in this case, both the Linux and Mac OS. And the part of the solution, I hate to call it an add-on, but it is its own product, but it's called AD Bridge. And what that allows you to do is take that policy and take that familiar infrastructure and deploy it out, extend it out to things like Linux and Mac OS. And as Charles showed you, touched on briefly, if you're using University Policy Administrator as well, you can suck it in and look at it there and manage it all together. So you can manage both sides together. What exists now is usually the siloed world of Windows on the left, the familiar Active Directory structure, OUs, groups, users, endpoints management that way that everyone's familiar with, that's been around for a long time, right? For 20 plus years, the use of group policy within Active Directory to manage domains and on the environment. On the right-hand side, we use Linux as an example. That is, in our experience, the most common use of this AD bridging or extension technology. But things are done their own way, right? And in the Linux world. And so what that means is from a high level organizational standpoint, you don't have that consistency, right? You're doing things different ways in different areas. You're not looking at things the same way. You don't have a single view across your environment, across these two particular silos. You're not managing the same way across these two different silos as well. So what tends to happen is on the right-hand side and the left-hand side, they tend, as time goes on, they look differently, right? They drift apart. Things may look differently on the right side in the Linux world. It's typically local user management or some sort of LDAP integration used to manage the identities and the user accounts. Configuration is done through different set of tools and scripting. So things, just because they're being done differently and separately, naturally over time, they drift apart. And that configuration drift is a real thing to where parts of your organization may be in compliance and others certainly won't be. Next slide, please. So what AD Bridge really done, as I mentioned before here, is what it's doing is seeking to pull that in all under one management framework. So there is a agent associated with the AD Bridge utility or product that gets deployed to these non-Windows or non-domain assets and allows you to pull it all into one unified management console. The two primary things it does is one is user management and authentication. Allows you to bring it in to Active Directory and manage it as one kind of user group community. The second thing is configuration of those endpoints can be managed and enforced in one common interface that coincides or extends the Active Directory familiar controls out. Next slide, please. So one of the primary things it does is it allows you to, as I said, extend those familiar Active Directory tools and methodologies that you've been working on into a new domain or into a new area. It allows you to take these policies maybe that you've had working for a long time within Windows that are tried, tested, and true, and able to export them now and use them in new areas. I know Charles is going to use Linux as an example in his demonstration. So that's a common one we see is clients being able to take, especially as cybersecurity becomes more and more prevalent and on everyone's mind, being able to take things like NIST and FIPS and STIG requirements and deploy them out to new environments is something that's been a primary use of AD Bridge in recent times. Next slide, please. Thank you. So some things to note with AD Bridge. Basically, it allows you to natively join the Linux boxes in this case and users to Active Directory and manage those users and groups as you would as if they were part of Active Directory. There's no proxy or middle service that's synchronizing from Active Directory out to your Linux environment. You're able to create policies, and Charles is going to show this in his demonstration, basically configuration settings for those endpoints, right? So that you deploy that to all your Linux endpoints in this case, and also enforce them, right? So one of the things that AD Bridge does is it monitors the settings that are supposed to be in place, and if they're changed, it rolls it back. So that's a key part to keeping your desired state on these critical endpoints. Also, when new boxes or new images come online, once they're joined, they do receive that gold image, right? Configuration automatically that you've established within your environment. It can work with on-premise, cloud resources, or any hybrid thereof. It will work with your popular cloud services, AWS, Azure, Google, and it is a set up and maintained by you, right? So you're able to configure these policies the way you want, deploy them, update them, manage them. You also get some of the great change flow as well that Charles already showed with regards to group policy for these universal policies as well.
So like Chris said, I'm going to talk about AD Bridge and a little bit of the UPA web console, but I want to make sure that you understand that AD Bridge and UPA are two completely separate products that can be used in concert if you choose to, and I'll show you why that might be important in a minute. But like Chris said, also, one of the important things to note here is we are doing a native joined Active Directory for your Linux and Mac machines. What does that mean? That means when I go add my AD Bridge agent on my Linux machines or my Mac machines, I have objects, actually the objects within AD that represent these machines. So now I can create policies and treat these like native AD resources. The first part of AD bridging, anybody who's heard of AD bridging before knows what this is. This is really what the standard of AD bridging is, and that is identity management. Getting rid of local users and having the ability to manage the users in Active Directory for your Linux machines. So real quick, what I'll show you is I've got my users, and here I've got let's see. Up here, ADB users, Charles admin, properties, and this is my CD admin account within Active Directory. So because we natively join Active Directory, these users get added and removed in real time from the ability to be able to log on to the Linux machines. I'm just going to go and create a new user real quick. And 02. So cdadmin 02 at adb.local. Next. I'll not make it change passwords. Finish. Let's take a look at that again real quick, just so I account. There we go. cdadmin 02. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a new session to one of my Linux machines. 02. Yep, that's right. I'm using short names. You can use long names if you want. And you can see it's telling me use my AD credentials. And now you can see I'm in as that user. I do an ID, and you can see it'll show me cdadmin as a domain user. So real time, I delete that user. I can no longer get in real time. I'm able to manage my users across my Linux machines. So I'm going to exit out of there real quick. And that is the part of AD bridging that most people are familiar with. Well, where it gets really interesting with our AD bridge, and Chris touched on this a little bit, is we also give you the ability to manage policies, not just user policies, system configuration policies. What does that mean? So you can see when I go into my domain, I have my OU structure here, my Linux machines. I have my cloud Linux and my on-site, and in cloud, I've got my AWS machines, my Azure machines, my Google machines. I can manage machines no matter where they reside. And I can manage them using group policies, or in a minute, I'll show you that can be universal policies. And the way that works is I've got my OU structure for my devices, for my Linux machines. It could be Mac as well, or non-domain joined Windows. And I've got a global firewall policy. So that's at the top level OU. That's going to get applied to every machine that goes into the OU structure, just like Active Directory works today on Windows. And then I go down and I've got my different policies based on the, for me, the way I structured my OUs is where they're located. So what does a policy for Linux machines look like? I will show you real quick with my global firewall policy. And there we go. Launching the SnapIn. And yes, this is a SnapIn. It does not have to be on. In fact, we recommend it not be on the domain controller. We don't recommend that you do anything, install anything on the domain controller. So I'm working on a machine that has access with the ADUC SnapIn, the group policy management editor. And it's our Linux settings SnapIn that I'm working with now. But you can see I can go in and look at my Linux settings, and it starts with firewall. So I've got my firewall settings here, and this is going to be the local firewall settings that I'm allowed to edit. Well, allowed to edit is all of them, and what that means is you can see on this one. For my policy that I have deny HTTP and FTP. None of those machines are going to be web servers or FTP servers, but I can go in and I can do at the service level, or I can write rules at the IP tables level. So I can do a custom rule, and this allows me to start building custom rules just like you would at IP tables, except they're in this policy that's going to get pushed out to all my machines when they come online and join that OU. I've got services, and with services, I'll show you what this means in a minute, but this means I can manage services on those machines, and I can have them always be started to make sure they're always up and running with the policy, stopped or restarted. I'll explain how this makes sense in a minute. Configuration files. By default, we have SSH and sudo as you can manage, but you can do custom configuration files. I'll show you that in a moment as well. Deploy files. This is really interesting. I think you're going to like this. I can deploy an entire configuration file, not just the settings within a configuration file. And by doing that, I can harden and persist that. Execute commands. I use this to configure machines. And then I can do AD logins. And because we're natively joined to Active Directory, we honor all of the security permissions and group permissions within AD. What this allows you to do is to be able to go in and add more granular role or permissions down to the machine level. So you may at the top level want to do added some machines and a group of users to those machines, but there may be people in that group that you really don't want to have access to, maybe a handful of machines in that group or that OU. So without having to restructure your OUs or your groups, you can go in and create rules at the machine level that'll allow specific users or deny specific users, things like that. So I'm going to show you a couple of policies. This one was specifically my firewall policy at the top level. So one of the things I do is in AWS, interestingly enough, AWS does not like their default templates to have Firewall D installed on them. I want a firewall on every one of my machines. So what I do is I use execute commands, and the very first thing I do is an install of Firewall D, enable the firewall, start the firewall. That gives me the ability to configure that machine, and it can really be any sort of configuration, but I can install the products, the things on it that I want. And then when the machine comes online, it gets Firewall D installed. And because the way policies work, it rolls up, it'll add that global firewall policy. So it'll install and configure the firewall for me all in one fell swoop by adding these policies. So what I really want to show you is some of the policies at work. So you can see I'm on this machine over here. This is my Red Hat machine. And you can see over here, I'm tailing my log file for the AD Bridge agent. So what I'm going to do is I've got a policy here called, for my on-site Linux machines, custom app config. Remember my login banner I showed you a minute ago saying use my AD credentials? That's also a policy that I created. I can make that say anything I want. But the custom app config is interesting because this is where I can do things like create a configuration file. It could be specific settings in a config file, but I can create an entire configuration file, push that out and enforce it. And this could be for any application whatsoever. So if I go here and do deploy files, you can see here, and I'll extend this out. I've got this config file and it's custom app config. And I have my gold image config files right here. Custom app config, there it is. Let's take a look at that and see what it looks like. Custom application configuration, gold file, gold image, secure this app, yes. This can be any configuration file. It doesn't even have to be a config file. It could be an index page on a website. But I've got this custom application. It's got this configuration file that nobody would know, but I want to enforce it and manage it over time. So I've got this custom app config. This could be, you know, pretty much anything on the machine that you wanted it to be, any configuration file that you wanted. But you can see it goes, I've created the GPO with it, custom app config, and I land it in the destination path of home root custom app. I know permission 777, what are you thinking? But this is a demo. So there's my custom app config policy. Well, over here on this machine, you can see I am in home root custom app. And I am going to do that. And there's that custom app config. So I'm going to cat that, show you. Cat custom app config, custom application configuration, gold file, gold image, secure this app, yes. Yep, that's the configuration file I showed you. It's in my policy. So if you notice, I am root. So I should be able to do whatever I want on this machine, right? Yeah, of course, you're root. Well, watch over here as I do this. So what I'm going to do is nano custom app config, and I'm going to go edit that thing because I am not, I have root permission, but I'm a bad guy. I want to hack this machine, and I'm going to start editing things and giving myself access to anything I want. So exploited, that'll show them. And I'm going to save that. Yes. Save it as custom app config. Yep, I want to do that. But over here, you can see in my tailed log file, my file watcher said that something's happened. What? Something changed on my home root custom app config file. Wait a second. This actually can be sent out. We do have the ability to tie in with SIMs. So this could be an alert that your security team gets on their SIM system. So they can see immediately that this machine's somebody's gone in and started violating a security policy. We do have customers that use these to configure Chris said, the STIG requirements for NIST FIPS. If someone has root access and goes and tries to violate the NIST FIPS configuration, let me just show you real quick before it changes. It's been exploited. Over here, what's happening is I've just violated a security policy. A warning's been sent to my security team, but what's happening in the background is we are checking Active Directory to see if there are any new GPOs. We're going to make sure we have the latest GPOs for the entire system. So we're going to put that, not just that one config file, but the entire machine back to its desired state, because we know some of security policies have been violated. We don't know what else has been violated. So we're going to roll the machine back and reapply all of these policies within 60 seconds. So you can see it went through, reapplied all of my GPOs. I go over here and cat that file again, and you can see that that config file has been rolled back to its desired state, the gold standard for that machine. So if I go here and show you how that works, when I created this policy, I selected to enforce settings and maintain a local cache. The enforce settings means we're going to monitor, and if someone tries to violate this policy, we're going to roll it back to the desired state, even if that person is root. The maintain local cache, that means in the event that the domain controller is offline and I can't check for updated policies, I will apply the last known good gold standard policy, because we store those in an encrypted database on the machine, and we can pull those and reapply those even if the BC is offline. So this is AD Bridge kind of at a high level, and I can see already, I can see through the internet that I've got Linux people and Windows people going, yeah, but there's no way us Windows guys are going to give the Linux guys administrator rights into group policy, and the Linux guys are saying there's no way I'm going to work within Active Directory and work on group policy objects. That's not how I build policies for Linux. That's where AD Bridge and UPA come together, or at least the UPA web console. So I showed you this. I'm going to log in real quick. If you have an environment where your Windows team and your Linux teams are basically walled off from each other and aren't able to, for whatever reason, work together in a shared environment, that's fine. We've got you covered there as well, because I can go in and work with my policies. And just like we showed you in UPA, I can go in, and I'll just cancel that. I'll show you one of mine here. So I will go. And here's some Linux policies. There's a Linux policy. I have no settings in that one. Let's see, config file settings. There we go. Policies 3. And you can see I can go in. I can check out this Linux policy. I can start working with my firewall settings, all of the same settings that were available in the GPMC SnapIn. I can now not give my Linux guy, for you Windows guys, not give my Linux guys administrative access to Active Directory or group policy to be able to work with policies. You Linux guys, you never even have to mess with Active Directory. You can manage your policies all within this web console. So that's AD Bridge and how we not only do the authentication piece that you're probably familiar with, but we bring so much more with the ability to manage, monitor, and enforce policies across your Linux assets, both on-prem and in the cloud.